I had nursed two children very successfully for well over a year, and the second one well over 2.5 years, so I didn't really think anything of it. I was a lactation consultant. I had breastfed successfully. But when our third child was born, I was really humbled by the fact that no matter what I did, I could not produce everything that she needed.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Episode number 170. Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC, which stands for International Board Certified Lactation Consultant, and I help moms with breastfeeding. Thanks so much for coming back and being with us for part 2 of Jenn's interview. If you missed part 1, you definitely want to go back and listen to part 1, which is episode number 169. In part 1, Jenn was telling us about her breastfeeding experience with her first baby. We left off at the point where she was telling us how devastated and surprised she was when she found out that her baby had lost too much weight. She just could not believe that with all the hours she had spent breastfeeding her baby, that he was losing weight. She had called around and asked for help and was told that everything was fine. So she just kept breastfeeding. In today's show, Jenn shares with us what she learned from the lactation consultant and the impact she had on her breastfeeding experience. For my regular listeners, you will note that it has been a while since I have asked any of my guests to contribute to the Confessions of a Breastfeeding Mother segment. I like to change things up a bit, so it's been a while. But there was something in me at a certain point during the show that out of the blue, I found myself asking Jenn to tell us about any confessions that she might have as a breastfeeding mother. Once you hear her answer, you will understand why I'm glad that I asked her the question.
I worked really diligently to, nurse him and pump afterwards and provide him that milk. And within 24 hours, he was a completely different baby. And I was a completely different mom, a woman, because I felt like, okay, there's an answer here. That was really that just pivotal learning experience that really just kind of catapulted me, like we talked about earlier, going from one career choice to another. That experience just completely changed me. So it was a huge learning experience in so many different ways.
How many days old was he when you took him in for that visit?
Oh, that's a great question. I want to say he was between 3 and 5 days old.
That's great because you were able to catch it and turn it around much sooner than some of the moms we get to see in a private practice.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, some moms think, when you call a phone number and they just say, oh, well, a newborn can be cluster feeding. And without seeing hands-on, and that's what I, try to tell clients and friends and family members now, is that if you think something's wrong, don't just rely on a phone call or a book. See somebody that is professional or go to a support group where you can get, guidance and have that hands-on assessment because it's so important.
I always say it's kind of like driving blind. You just can't see everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a couple of things that you said that was of interest, and one of them is this whole notion of babies are feeding all the time, and I find that is something very common that new parents say, and for us, if we go from whatever we were doing life before kids to literally sitting on a couch 8 or 9 times a day with a baby feeding, even if they're feeding for the typical half hour, 45-minute average feeding, and then, they're okay for a couple of hours in between, for us, that's all the time because that is nothing like what our life was before. So I learned that when parents say that, frequently people will just respond very easily. Yeah, that's what newborns do. And as a
Right.
lactation consultant, we've learned to say, well, tell me about it, and so I will ask
Mm-hmm.
parents, like, just, I know it's all across the board, but just give me like the last 24 hours, like if you remember. And then you really get to learn, is it their
Mm-hmm.
perception that it's all the time, or is it truly what we know to be all the time? And
Absolutely.
like, that's a big difference. And you get, so when you're sitting with someone, you get to actually have that conversation with them. And then, of course, when you're sitting with them, you get to see, because a lot of times over the phone, moms will say, my baby's feeding all the time. Well, I don't really know what that means. And I can see the
Mm-hmm.
lips blanch, and the baby has a good latch. I was told the baby has a good latch. Well, I don't really know what that means or trust that until I actually see. But one of my most fun things is I ask moms sometimes over the phone, well, how do you know the baby has a good latch? And it's either I was told, or it looks like the videos and books, or my favorite one is I could see, I think you said, like those fish lips. But once moms tell me that they could see the fish lips once the baby is on, I already know it's really not a great latch, because if your newborn is latched on pretty well, you really won't see the full fish lips once they're already on. Just like you said, there's so much to be learned from being able to see. And I really like to highlight that to my audience, because so many people, there's a lot of warm lines and there's a lot of breastfeeding helpers, which is wonderful. And sometimes moms just have a heavy reliance on that, and they just don't know what they don't know. So when someone says, yes, that sounds like a good latch. Yes, babies latch all the time. What I said to you is, that's great that you went in that 3 to 5 day time, because frequently some moms get a sense of confidence from what they're told, and they go much longer before they're realizing that there's a big problem.
Absolutely. And I wholeheartedly agree, not only as a mom being there, but as a lactation consultant, because there's nothing that can truly take the place of that in-person breastfeeding assessment. Just knowing the background of, the medical history of the baby and the mom, how did the birth go? What are the diapers like? Observing the baby and the mother hands-on, being able to, there's so many factors that play into it. And you're absolutely right. It seems like all new moms and families say, well, just baby's nursing all the time. And that's probably where, when I had my first and I called those lines, they, maybe I don't recall them asking specific questions, but all I remember them saying is, oh, well, that's normal. That's cluster feeding. Then once I saw the lactation consultant, I realized that there was something going on. So absolutely, I wholeheartedly agree with you in terms of emphasizing that, that in-person assistance is so important.
Yeah, it's like, that's what I keep saying. I gotta see the baby and the boob.
Exactly,
I gotta
yes.
see how you're doing this little breastfeeding dance together. So you fixed breastfeeding, it seems like, really early on, which is great. But you're still a new mom, and I think with breastfeeding, because we are so hands-on with our baby, and because we're not giving our baby to someone else to take over for the nighttime or for an afternoon, so we can get a much longer stretch of sleep that we might really like and need. So I imagine that you're just like a lot of other moms, that you were somewhat sleep deprived in the early days. Would you say that that's true?
Absolutely. And I wouldn't say it with just the first, I would say with the second, third, and fourth.
What are some of the things that you would tell a new mother about being sleep deprived? Any tips that you have in making it a little bit better?
One of the first things that I would say is something I did not implement until the fourth, and that is limiting visitors. I know that, families and friends can get so excited about the birth of a baby, but mom, dad, baby, they need time to rest and they need time to bond. And, that limiting the amount of visitors and the amount of time that visitors come, I would believe has to be top of the list recommendation. And then I know that probably a lot of moms have heard this: sleep when the baby sleeps. Please, seriously, just do it. The dishes can wait. The laundry can wait. Other things can wait, but if your baby is napping, just take some time for yourself and take a nap too. Probably those two things, first and foremost, is what I would recommend.
I love the tip on visitors, and it's it's also very interesting that you said you didn't implement it until the fourth. When I taught, we all want everybody so excited. We want to be so nice, and especially sometimes as new mothers, we have a problem saying no. So when I taught breastfeeding classes, I would talk in childbirth and breastfeeding classes, and I would tell the moms, who is your support person going to be? And you're going to have them be the policeman, so to speak. And if you feel like you don't have what it takes to be able to tell loving people in your family and friends that they can't come over now, then you have to assign someone else to task, because that is probably going to be your number one way of getting in good naps, because it's like Murphy's Law. That's the time that your baby might have taken that longer nap, is when you now have visitors in your home that you're having to entertain. And you're looking at the clock and you're like, I can't believe he's been sleeping for 2 hours and 20 minutes. He never does this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it makes life difficult, because you never know when your baby is going to have a better or a longer nap. And I tell moms, like, when the baby's fed and everything else, you've done your part, there's someone else in your household that they can take over, changing a baby, rocking a baby, burping a baby. That's the times you have to slide into the bedroom, pull down the blinds, put in some earbuds, put on some music. And even if you feel like you're too wired, that's how I was. And nobody really said to me, well, why don't you just lay down and just do some deep breathing like you did during the birth, or a meditation tape or something. In my head, I thought, I'm going here, the job is to sleep. And then I would lay down and my mind would be racing. And so it took me a long time to figure that out. But also, visitors and guests, and sometimes people lovingly have people drop off meals to them. And I always tell people, if you're listening, if you go and drop off a meal to someone, just drop off the meal, say hi, ask if they need anything else, and then say goodbye.
Oh my goodness, yes, I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely. Because sometimes people use that as an excuse to come and hold and see the baby. And the best thing that you can do, yes, it's appreciated to bring the meal, but I absolutely agree. Just drop it off. Is there anything else? And bye.
Exactly. I had one friend that I interviewed, and she just told a really funny story. And, we were talking about this whole subject of visitors, and she was saying how her brother-in-law, and maybe sister-in-law, I forget, but definitely her brother-in-law had come over and visit, and they were just way overstaying. And she just could not keep her eyes open, and she was falling asleep, still not getting the message. Then when she stood up to even give a stronger message, this brother-in-law just kept talking and talking and talking, and she said, Lori, I really think I fell asleep standing up. And
my goodness.
I was like, I just closed my eyes, and like a few seconds later I opened it up and Mary still wasn't. I know I went to sleep and he still was not getting the message.
Oh my goodness.
That's why I think we have to have someone else watching out for us.
Yes, my husband was that police person, because I'm that person that I would give the shirt off my back, and I can't say no, and I'm too nice, and I didn't want to offend anybody. So we made family and friends aware well in advance, and he was my policeman to help implement it.
That's great. That's fabulous. And in the world that we live in now, which may not have been so primary when you had your first, because that was 13 years ago, but now we have computers and cell phones and iPads, and actually all of that is also interruptive. And I talk to parents all the time about putting that aside too. Don't feel like you have to answer every email, answer every Facebook text, answer, everything. You don't need to do that. Just put it all aside and just make it, I call it this baby mode, just about you and the baby. But this time for you is going to go really quickly.
Absolutely. Quicker than we imagine.
I know. Poor kids lady, you could say that, right?
Oh my goodness, yes.
And your new baby, everything is probably just flying by. You probably feel like you just gave birth a few weeks ago.
Oh, yes. I mean, we had an amazing, very quick water birth at home with the third and the fourth. We look at him, and now he just turned 7 months, and he's scooting the army crawl, and he pulls up on things and tries to walk around things, and I'm like, wait a minute, you were just born. What's going on?
Like, stop, hold the presses.
Exactly. Oh my goodness, yes.
What's one thing that you have learned along the way? Because I believe that we all have some cool pearls of wisdom. So what's something you've learned along the way that you would like other mothers to know?
Probably the biggest thing is that to really understand and appreciate that, breastfeeding is a learned art. It's just like so many things in our life that like swimming or riding a bike or learning to walk or driving a car, it takes practice, it takes time, it takes patience. It may be a natural, that's what breasts were made for, but it's such a learned art, and it's a dance that's between the mother and the baby, and every mother is unique and every baby is unique, and you feel like something is off, ask for help. Don't suffer in silence. But just, realizing that it's not gonna, it's not always like the movies. It's not always like the, what you envision, that baby's just going to pop on and everything's perfect. And sometimes it is, but it's a learned art. And to just be good to yourself, and just know that you and baby are learning it together.
Great words of wisdom. And it's always interesting that this whole notion of something being natural, that we equate that with being easy.
Right. Absolutely.
If you could go back and put your arms around your newly postpartum self with your very first baby and whisper one thing in your ear, what would it be?
Probably, you're stronger than you imagine. You're capable. You're doing the best that you can, and that's all that you can do. And you're providing the best for your child. This will pass.
Yeah. Now, just out of curiosity, did you have any other people in your life at that time who could do that for you, who could say that to you?
Really looking back, it was quite limited on that support and that encouragement. So subsequent children, absolutely. But with the first, not so much. I can really empathize with moms, like single mothers and, those that don't necessarily have that support, whether it's purposeful or not purposeful on the part of friends and family. The mother's perception is her reality. I just remember feeling so powerless and, feeling like, can I really do this? I can't do this. I'm not sure I'm doing it right. If I were to look back and be able to whisper something, I probably would just say, you're a lot stronger than you think you are. You can do this. You're doing the best you can. You're doing a great job. And the best is all you can ever do.
Yes, wonderful, kind, compassionate words. And I think that anybody here who's listening, if you have the opportunity to be around another new postpartum mom, those are really great words that you could tell her. And for any other moms here who's fairly new and listening and nursing her baby and sitting on the couch crying and having such a hard time, I would really take those words to heart. You are strong, you are capable, and you are doing the best you can. And all we can do is the best we can in the moment, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's that the best that you are doing is amazing, more amazing than you will ever imagine. And it's amazing for you, and it's amazing for the baby, and it may seem overwhelming, but you're doing an amazing job. And just like you said, just please take those words to heart, because it is the absolute truth.
Yes. Switching gears to a little bit of sense of humor, which I don't know about you, but I often say that we have to have a sense of humor about all things in motherhood, and one of them definitely about breastfeeding, because there's a lot of funny things that happen in our breastfeeding journey. And I'm wondering if you've had something funny happen with any of your breastfeeding experiences with your kids.
Oh, I've had lots. I say it was embarrassing at the time, but now I look back and I find it quite funny. The first time I ever went out in public was with my first, that's now 13. I was nursing, and he was screaming and screaming and screaming. I had never nursed in public before. He was, I don't remember how old, but probably only a couple weeks old. And I was in the line, and I was finally like, okay, I don't know what else to do other than I just got to nurse him. He goes on, and he pulls off, and I spray the bag boy. I sprayed the bag boy. I was so mortified at the time. I mean, now I look back and it's humorous, of course, but this poor guy, he was a young teenager, and he's like, like, oh my goodness, what just happened? Oh my gosh.
Now I would be like, hey, let me do that again.
I know. Probably. So I don't know. Probably, our kids are so silly. I've had some very interesting, funny things, but I would have to say that probably was the most humorous thing.
It's one of those things where when it happened the first time to you, you probably didn't know who was more shocked, the boy or you.
Absolutely.
And whoever that person is somewhere 13 years later, I'm sure he's still telling someone that story. And who knows, maybe
Probably.
He's a dad himself and he shares that. I think that's a really funny story.
Hopefully he sees it in humor now.
I hope so, because I think it's pretty funny.
Taking a little break so I can tell you that this show is being brought to you by allaboutbreastfeeding.biz. Sound familiar to some of my regular listeners? If you have not been to the homepage, you'll want to check it out so you can learn in detail about the ways in which I help and connect with mothers. I would like to highlight the Breastfeeding Mothers Group. I call it the Before and After Mothers Group. I love joining soon-to-be moms with new moms. You have so much to talk about and so much to share with each other. We meet online for 1 hour once a week. How many times have you felt overwhelmed in your role as a new mother? How many times do you wish that you had a group of moms that you could meet with that really got you? They really understood what you were feeling, and they really know what it's like to be a soon-to-be mom or a new mom. You are frequently experiencing many emotions that are on both ends of the spectrum. New mothers are feeling so happy and so blessed to have a new baby, and yet at the same time, you have these other feelings. Sometimes you're afraid to share your thoughts with others. How would it look to tell others that you're having a difficult time keeping up with the demands of new motherhood and that you never expected it to be so hard? And for pregnant moms, you want to be in this group because you will get real and honest answers from moms who are in the thick of new motherhood. They will help you to prepare for your role as a new mom. There are lots of tips and suggestions they will wish someone had told them, and they are just waiting to share this with you. I will be facilitating the group to make sure that we keep the conversation going and to ensure that this is a judgment-free and safe place to share your feelings. Registration for this group is open now and it will close on May 12th, 2017. I like to keep the group small enough so that we can really get to know one another. Once we reach 10 people, the registration closes. We will meet for 6 weeks, and frequently moms love this group so much they sign up for another 6 weeks with the same moms. So you really do become quite close with each other. For more details on times and fees and registration information, just go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz.
What are some things that we do as breastfeeding mothers that we don't really talk about? And I have this thing that I like to talk about, Confessions of the Breastfeeding Mother. Now, if you're going to confess it on the air, it's no secret anymore. I wonder if you're willing to share something that you really never told anybody about your breastfeeding.
It was very secretive at the time. I've shared with some people and much more so recently because I've learned that it's not necessarily something to be ashamed of. But at the time, it was a very humbling experience. There's a big gap between our second and our third, and that's I was remarried, and we decided that we wanted to add to the family. But during that time frame, I was a breast cancer survivor, had to have a lumpectomy and subsequent breast surgery. It was not something that I shared honestly with really anybody. My family didn't know about it until after everything was was done. You know, I had nursed two children very successfully for well over a year, and the second one well over 2.5 years. So I didn't really think anything of it. You know, I was a lactation consultant. I had breastfed successfully. But when our third child was born, I was really humbled by the fact that no matter what I did, I could not produce everything that she needed. I was in denial. I was embarrassed. I just kept trying and trying and trying, but she wasn't gaining the weight that she needed. And it really took a mentor of mine of, 10 plus years, who's also a lactation consultant. She really had to kind of, take my hand and tell me, you need to let your pride go and you need to put your child first. Because of what you've gone through, because of the breast surgery and the lumpectomy and everything, things change. And you know that as a lactation consultant, but right now you're in mommy mode and you're just in denial and your baby needs to be supplemented. So we used about 20% of screen donor milk, and I used an SNS at breast to provide that to our third child. It's not something that until now, was really shared with anybody. I was extremely embarrassed at first. I felt inadequate. But now I know that, that's nothing to be embarrassed about. There's so many mothers out there. And if anybody's listening that has gone through that, it's nothing to be embarrassed about. Just even providing 10% of your baby's intake is amazing. And now I work on the board of directors with the organization that we got the donor milk from for our third child. And I have to tell you that, as being a recipient of the donor milk, being in those shoes, it's really helped me to be more empathetic to others. It's provided me an opportunity to kind of give back to the community by being a part of the organization. It's really provided me a whole different perspective on life, on breastfeeding, on being a lactation consultant, on so many different things. And so I've learned that sharing that story can really help other moms realize that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's okay to just, if you can just produce a little bit. It's okay that you've gone through different experiences. It's nothing to be embarrassed about.
Well, first, I would really like to say that I'm thrilled that you're a survivor.
Thank you. Me too.
You went through a lot, and then you had your baby, and then you went through a lot more. Probably something, it sounds like it, like Jen, like it just took you totally by surprise, because thank goodness you are a survivor. And you just carried on with your life, and you become pregnant and have another baby. And I don't know if it's something that you thought about and kind of pushed deep down in the surface, or if it's something that you just assumed really wouldn't be a problem because you breastfed other kids. But it certainly sounds like you did reach a point where you realized that you weren't making enough for your baby. And so what I'm curious about is the point where you realized that you weren't able to make enough milk for her, and your friend taking you aside and talking about you need to let your pride go and put your baby first. Like at what point, like how old was your baby at that point?
She was between I want to say about this 2 to 3 months old. Yeah, she was probably about 2 to 3 months old. And to be honest, probably a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was a lactation consultant, and I just kept feeling like, okay, well, I'll just try this, and I'll try this, and I'll try this, and I'll try this. But it really took that outside perspective lactation consultant to just say, hey, it's just not working. And here it is in black and white. We really need to do something else. And it's okay to do something else. So hopefully that answers your question.
I imagine that was probably, I'm looking at it from a perspective of compassion, and I don't see any problem with it. I'm just getting in your head in that was probably one of the most difficult things you've had to accept.
Yeah, I mean, it still chokes me up to think about it, absolutely. Because no mother wants to feel like that they can't provide everything that their child needs, no matter what it is, no matter whether it's love or support or educational guidance. And for me, that equated with breastfeeding as well. It was very humbling, and it was very emotional. But it's really helped me to grow as an individual and as a professional and as a mother.
Yeah, I'm quite sure you bring that into the work that you do with other moms, and that's probably, there's a lot of hard parts about the work that I do, and breastfeeding is difficult for moms, but it's probably one of the hardest things that I encounter when I work with moms for me to help other mothers with, is the realization that they're breastfeeding and they're doing great. It's just there's a little bit of a miss in the volume that they could make for their baby, and that they will need to give milk from whatever other source they decide. But it is such an emotional thing for us mothers, and we both know we're doing amazing. So the fact that you're not making the complete volume your baby needs, in a logical sense, separated from being the mother herself, we're all like, wow, you're amazing, you're doing fabulous, and nobody is working harder than you, and there is no shame. But for the mother herself, there's that leap that she has to take from being in denial to accepting it to then saying, okay, what do I need to do about it? And that's a huge leap. It's a huge emotional roller coaster, and I can only empathize. I have not been in that place before, so I cannot come from the same place that you come from, of saying, I know I've been there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but I can certainly appreciate your perspective as well in terms of working with moms, because it is just as emotional, I believe, for the lactation consultant to have that conversation with the mother. And I've been there and that on that side of the fence as well, because, the mother is doing her best. And it's again, if anybody's listening that's in that position as a mother, just because your body's not in response that's producing the 100% doesn't mean that you're not doing your best. You're doing an amazing job. And, having that little extra help in terms of the amount of intake that your baby needs at the time does not equal, in any sort of stretch of imagination, any inadequacy on your part. So, absolutely, it's a very emotional experience. And just like you were saying, going through those stages to reach that point of, okay, so what do I need to do now? Very emotional. But I can appreciate you empathizing, sympathizing with me.
Yes, thank you for saying that so much more eloquently than I did. I appreciate that. There's also, this is a learning experience for a lot of my audience who may not have an insider's view into the work that we do and the various experiences. So I would love for you to give a little explanation about what an SNS is, because there's a large population who has no clue what that is. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about your donor milk.
An SNS is what's called a supplemental nursing system. And it was basically a device that went around my neck and housed a container, and almost like a little bottle. And it had tubes out to the side that I would literally tape to my areola, and it would exceed probably about 1/4 an inch past my nipple. And so when Emery is her name, my 3-year-old, went to breast, she was not only stimulating my breast and stimulating the hormones within my body to continue to produce milk, and she was getting everything from me, but she was also getting the supplemental milk of the donor milk through a tube that was attached to that bottle, which is called the SNS. And what was so great about it was that I was still able to have that close bonding nursing experience with her, and it still allowed her to get that extra amount that she needed. And from the other side of that as well, that extra stimulation of keeping her at breast really helped to enable to not only maintain my supply, but encourage my body to continue to produce more milk as well. For those moms out there that may feel like I'm not producing enough, I just have to go to bottles, that's a great option, is looking into a supplemental nursing system that can be used right at breast, whether it's the choice of donor milk or whether it's the choice of artificial baby milk. It can be done right there at the breast. And keeping baby at the breast, of course, is the most optimal way to supplement.
And so part of the other beauty of that is that your baby does get a full feeding at your breast. does stimulate your breast. And for moms who wanted to avoid the bottle, that's also helpful for that reason too, right?
Absolutely. And you're also able to regulate the flow as well with having the SNS and feeding at breast. And I was that mom that wanted to avoid the bottle. And of course, as a lactation consultant, we often tell our moms, to try to avoid using bottles or pacifiers until breastfeeding and your milk supply is well established. So being able to keep the baby at breast and using that tool, that supplemental nursing system, allows for baby to stay at breast and get that full feeding that the baby needs. And you're able to start and stop the supplement at any time. So because there's, you're controlling those little tubes on the device. So there were times when, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to, stop it for a little bit now and let her, nurse a little bit more on me. Okay, I'm going to let it flow a little bit more. And, and working with a lactation consultant, a lactation professional can be very helpful if that's an option that they want to use to be able to keep the baby at breast if supplement is needed.
Yeah, there are things that we can get on the internet which make our lives so much easier, and yet certain things like the SNS, sometimes getting that over the internet, purchasing it, getting it in your home and struggling with it by yourself, it would be my druthers for every mom who's using the SNS to see if they can connect with a lactation consultant so they can go over all the little details about using the SNS. And you mentioned, ways to control the flow, and there are other things that you can do, and just a lot of other little tips. And also just to make sure, we really want to make sure that the baby is latched on well, because there are some moms who are using the SNS for the wrong reasons, and it's actually not helpful. Because it's just for the inappropriate reasons. So there's a whole learning curve that comes with the SNS. Thank you for explaining that.
In reference to, my decision, or our decision, my husband was a big part of that as well, is, I, being a lactation consultant and a mother, I never had used artificial baby milk with any of our other children. And it was really, really important to myself and my husband that our daughter was only going to receive human milk. And if it wasn't going to be from myself, we wanted it to be from a reliable source. So what we utilized was a local organization here in the Central Florida area called Get Pumped. They follow Habana guidelines to screen their donors. They do all the blood work and everything. However, we chose to go that route because the donor milk is actually from individuals within our community. That is done anonymously, so we didn't know necessarily who the donor was, but they went through a rigorous screening process. The difference there, though, is that it wasn't coming from a milk bank, because oftentimes, the milk bank, the priority is for a baby that's in the NICU. We got the donor milk from the organization here in our community.
And that's a big reason why the donor milk banks are springing up left and right, which I'm thrilled about, because
Absolutely.
The human milk banks kind of went out of favor quite a few years ago. There were many, then they went out of favor, then they came back, but the priority was to premature and sick babies. And I think the hard part about that is we hear, as mothers, hear so much about the benefits of human milk. And then, what if you're lucky, your baby wasn't born premature and is not ill, but you want your baby to have the same benefits, but this milk is prioritized. So, and we totally get that. But then that leaves the mom who wants to give her baby donor milk. Where does she go? So I'm thrilled about that. And you said, is it called pumped milk?
The organization is called Get Pumped.
Get Pumped.
Yes, Get Pumped. And it's here in the Central Florida area. I'm not certain whether there's, other organizations such as that in other areas of the United States. Get Pumped follows all the Habana guidelines in terms of, we have to do an online application. We do a verbal screening to ensure that they would be, not on any contraindicated medications or lifestyles. We do the blood work just like a milk bank would. And we ensure that all proper guidelines are followed when they pump and collect the milk and store the milk. And we do a 72-hour hold at negative, 20 degrees in our freezer prior to issuing out the milk to the recipients. So, we go to great lengths to ensure that the milk is safe and is coming from a safe source and going to babies that are in need.
There are so many things in the field of lactation that I'm very excited about, and I love to see our field growing and changing. But probably the one thing that I'm most excited about is the resurgence of milk banks.
Yes.
And so in your area, it's called Get Pumped. But the thing is, a lot of people don't even know about it. It's like this hidden little secret unless you're like in the know, and nobody means to keep it a secret. It's just that sometimes it's hard for people, if you're not in that community, to know about it. So that's also something that I want my listeners to know about, that if you do need donor milk, there may very well be a donor bank in your community. So you should just like look on Facebook and Google it. Go to a breastfeeding group and ask around, because you have a lot more choices about what to feed your baby. If you need to and you choose to want mom's milk for your baby, you may be able to make that happen.
Sure, absolutely. And in our area, we do have, an actual Havana milk bank, the Mother's Milk Bank of Florida. We do have that, but as we had, indicated earlier, a lot of that priority goes to the NICU babies. But also just from a personal and professional standpoint, I would indicate, caution on the informal milk sharing. So just to ensure that if moms do choose to seek donor milk, just to use caution in where they're obtaining that donor milk. And making sure that there's precautions that are put in place in terms of ensuring that it's a safe option.
Great. Thanks for adding that, Jen. I really appreciate you taking the extra time to go over some of the other aspects of what we were talking about. I could have talked about it myself, but it's so much nicer coming from you, from another IBCLC, from someone who experienced it herself. It just gives me great pleasure to be able to provide this information and education to my audience. So I really appreciate you taking the extra time, Jen.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. If any of my listeners did want to contact you, if you're open to it, is there a way that they could contact you?
Sure, absolutely. I'm on Facebook. Jenn, Jenn Forster, Foster. I also have a Facebook page that's called Nurturing Miracles. And then there's always my email address, Jenn with 2 N's, Jenn, and then IBCLC@gmail.com.
I know, I saw that in your email and I'm like, darn, why did I ever think of that? But that's so cool. And my audience also knows that if you join my Facebook group, All About Breastfeeding Community, and you join, if there's a question that any of you have for Jen, you could always pose it there and I will get it to her. Thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. I appreciate you too. Thank you so much for all you do for moms and babies all over the place here.
To both of us, back at you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wouldn't you agree with me that this has been a pretty amazing interview already? However, there is so much more to talk about. Please join us for part 3 of Jen's interview, where she lets us in on her tandem nursing experience. You can see from hearing Jenn talk today that she is not one to mince words or to shy away from talking about some really personal stuff. So I look forward to having you listen to the next show. Until then, bye-bye.